Thomas Mitchell sat quietly on the park bench, feeding breadcrumbs to the pigeons that gathered around his worn combat boots. The morning sun cast long shadows across the peaceful garden, and, for a moment, he could almost forget the weight that pressed constantly on his chest. At 62, Thomas carried himself with the straight posture that 25 years of military service had drilled into his bones, but his eyes held the distant look of someone who had seen too much. He wore his old green jacket, the one with patches sewn carefully by his late wife Margaret. She had insisted on mending it every time a new tear appeared, saying it was part of who he was. Now, 3 years after her funeral, the jacket was one of the few things that still connected him to the man he used to be. The man who had purpose, who had someone waiting for him at home, who believed that his service meant something. The park had become Thomas's daily refuge since Margaret's death. Their small apartment felt too empty, too quiet without her gentle humming as she prepared his morning coffee or her soft voice reading aloud from the newspaper. Here, surrounded by the simple beauty of flowers and trees, he could sit with his memories without feeling completely lost. A group of children played nearby, their laughter echoing across the green space. Thomas watched them with a slight smile, remembering how Margaret had always wanted children of their own. They had tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. Instead, she had poured her maternal love into the neighborhood kids, becoming the unofficial grandmother to dozens of children whose own families were too busy to notice their scraped knees or hurt feelings. "You're their guardian angel," Thomas had often told her, and she would blush and wave away his words. But he meant it. Margaret had a gift for making everyone feel seen and valued, a quality that had made their house the gathering place for lonely neighbors and struggling families. Now Thomas tried to carry on that legacy in his own quiet way. He volunteered at the local food bank twice a week, helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and made sure the kids in his building had someone to talk to when they needed it. It wasn't the same as having Margaret's warm presence, but it helped fill the hollow spaces in his days. As he sat feeding the pigeons, Thomas noticed a commotion near the playground. A tall teenager with bleached hair and expensive clothes was shoving a smaller boy, taking his backpack and dumping its contents onto the ground. The bigger kid, who looked about 16, was laughing as papers scattered in the wind, and the younger boy scrambled to collect his belongings. "Please give it back," the smaller boy pleaded, his voice trembling. "My mom will be mad if I lose my homework again." The bully just laughed harder, kicking at the papers and sending them flying further across the grass. "Maybe you should learn to stand up for yourself, wimp. Nobody's gonna help you in the real world." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He had spent his military career protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, fighting for those who had no voice. The sight of someone using their size and strength to hurt others brought back memories of why he had enlisted in the first place. He had grown up in a rough neighborhood where bullies ruled through fear, and he had promised himself he would never stand by and watch the strong prey on the weak. But these weren't enemy soldiers in a foreign country. This was just a kid being mean to another kid, and Thomas wasn't sure if it was his place to interfere. He was just an old veteran with too much time on his hands and a heart full of grief. What did he know about handling modern teenage problems? Still, as he watched the smaller boy's shoulders shake with suppressed tears, Thomas felt something stir in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced in Afghanistan when he saw civilians caught in the crossfire, the same protective instinct that had driven him to shield his fellow soldiers from harm. Some things never changed, no matter how old you got or how tired you became. The bully grabbed the smaller boy's lunch money, counting the bills with exaggerated pleasure. "Thanks for the donation, loser. Maybe now you'll learn to bring more next time." Several other children had stopped their games to watch, but none of them moved to help. They stood frozen, probably afraid they would become the next target. Thomas understood their fear. He had felt the same paralysis as a child, watching bigger kids terrorize his classmates while he prayed he wouldn't be noticed. That's when Thomas made his decision. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting after sitting for so long, and began walking toward the playground. His heart was beating faster than it had in months, not from fear but from purpose. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt like he had a clear mission, something that mattered beyond his own grief and loneliness. The bully was still taunting the smaller boy when Thomas approached. Up close, he could see that the victim was probably only 10 or 11 years old, with thick glasses and a gentle face that reminded Thomas of his younger brother. The child's clothes were clean but obviously secondhand, and his backpack was patched with duct tape in several places. "Excuse me," Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. The bully turned around, sizing up the older man with a sneer. "What do you want, old man? This isn't your business." Thomas had faced down enemy fighters who were armed and dangerous, but something about this moment felt more important than any battle he had fought overseas. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about standing up for what was right, about being the kind of person Margaret had believed him to be. "I think it's everyone's business when someone is being hurt," Thomas said calmly. "Why don't you give the boy his money back and we can all go about our day peacefully?" The teenager laughed, but there was something forced about it. "Or what? You gonna call my mom? I'm not scared of some old guy who probably can't even climb a flight of stairs without getting winded." Thomas felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same centered feeling he had experienced before every mission in the military. Fear and anger were luxuries he couldn't afford. What mattered was protecting the innocent and resolving the situation with as little harm as possible. "I'm not here to threaten you," Thomas said. "I'm here to ask you to do the right thing. That boy hasn't done anything to hurt you. He's just trying to go to school and learn, maybe make something of himself. Why would you want to make that harder for him?" For a moment, the bully's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. But then, his friends called out from across the playground, and his face hardened again. "Whatever, old man. Mind your own business before you get hurt." The teenager shoved the smaller boy one more time, hard enough to send him sprawling onto the ground. The child's glasses flew off his face and landed several feet away, one lens cracked from the impact. That's when Thomas felt something shift inside him. It wasn't anger exactly, but a deep, unshakable resolve. He had taken an oath long ago to protect and defend, and that oath didn't have an expiration date. It didn't matter that he was older now, that his knees ached and his hair was gray. Some responsibilities transcended age and circumstance. As the bully turned to walk away, clearly thinking the confrontation was over, Thomas stepped forward and gently helped the smaller boy to his feet. He picked up the broken glasses and examined them carefully, then looked directly into the child's frightened eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. The boy shook his head, but tears were streaming down his face. "He takes my lunch money every day," he whispered. "I'm afraid to tell my mom because she works so hard to give me that money." Thomas felt his heart break a little more. This wasn't just about one incident of bullying, it was about a pattern of abuse that had been going on for who knows how long. This child had been suffering in silence, protecting his mother from the knowledge that her hard-earned money was being stolen by a teenage thug. The bully had stopped walking when he realized Thomas wasn't backing down. He turned around with an expression of disbelief and growing anger. "Are you deaf, old man? I told you to mind your own business." Thomas stood up slowly, still holding the broken glasses. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every hard lesson he had learned in 6 decades of life. "Son, I've been in more fights than you've had hot meals, and I've learned something important along the way. The strongest people are the ones who use their strength to protect others, not to hurt them. Right now, you have a choice. You can be someone who makes the world a little bit darker, or you can be someone who makes it a little bit brighter. Which do you want to be?" The playground had gone completely silent. Even the younger children had stopped their games to watch what would happen next. Thomas could feel their eyes on him, could sense their hope that someone would finally stand up to the boy who had been terrorizing them. The bully took a step closer, his fists clenched. "You think you're tough because you're old? I'll show you what tough really means." Thomas remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed but ready. He had no desire to fight a teenager, no wish to prove anything through violence. But he also wasn't going to walk away while a child was being hurt. Sometimes, standing up for what was right meant being willing to pay a price. "I don't want to fight you," Thomas said simply. "I just want you to leave this boy alone." What happened next would change everything, though Thomas had no way of knowing that at the time. A black sedan with government plates had pulled up to the curb, and 3 men in dark suits were stepping out. They moved with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to authority, their eyes scanning the park with professional alertness. The man in the center was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to command. His companions flanked him protectively, their hands resting casually near their jackets in a way that suggested they were armed. They were walking directly toward the playground, drawn by the commotion that was unfolding. But Thomas didn't notice them yet. His attention was focused entirely on the situation in front of him, on a frightened child and an angry teenager and the choice that hung in the balance between them. The bully raised his fist, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment at being challenged by an old man in front of all these kids. "You asked for it, Grandpa." Thomas saw the punch coming and could have easily avoided it or countered it. His military training was as sharp as ever, his reflexes still quick despite his age. But, as the teenager's fist flew toward his face, Thomas made a conscious decision that would echo through the rest of his life. He chose not to fight back. Instead, he took the blow squarely on his jaw, stumbling backward but not falling. The impact sent a shock of pain through his skull, but he straightened up immediately, blood trickling from his split lip. "Feel better now?" he asked quietly, his voice steady despite the pain. The bully stared at him in shock, his fist still raised. He had expected the old man to crumple, to back down, to show fear. Instead, Thomas stood there with a slight smile, completely unintimidated. "Hit me again if you want," Thomas said. "But when you're done, you're still going to give that boy his money back, and you're still going to leave him alone. Because that's what's right, and deep down, you know it." That's when the 3 men in suits reached the playground, and everything changed forever. The silence that followed was unlike anything Thomas had ever experienced. The bully's fist remained frozen in midair, his mouth hanging open as he stared at something behind Thomas. The smaller boy had stopped crying, his eyes wide with confusion and growing amazement. Even the pigeons seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. Thomas turned slowly, expecting to see a police officer or perhaps an angry parent. Instead, he found himself face to face with 3 men who carried themselves with unmistakable authority. The man in the center stepped forward, and Thomas felt a jolt of recognition that made his breath catch in his throat. It was Prince William, the Prince of Wales, future King of England. The prince was dressed in a simple dark suit, but there was no mistaking his identity. His presence transformed the ordinary playground into something magical, as if reality itself had shifted to accommodate royalty walking among common people. His 2 protection officers maintained their professional distance while staying alert to every movement around them. "Your Highness," Thomas managed, instinctively coming to attention despite his civilian clothes and the surreal circumstances. Prince William studied Thomas's face, taking in the split lip and the blood that stained his collar. His expression was serious but not unkind, the look of someone who had seen enough of the world to understand when something significant was happening. "Are you all right?" the prince asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. Before Thomas could answer, the bully suddenly found his voice again. Oh my God, it's really you. I can't believe it. Can I get a selfie? This is so cool." The teenager's entire demeanor had transformed in an instant. The menacing aggressor who had been terrorizing a smaller child was now babbling like an excited fan, his phone already in his hand as he pushed forward toward the prince. Prince William held up a gentle but firm hand. "In a moment, perhaps. First, I'd like to understand what's been happening here." His gaze moved from Thomas to the smaller boy, who was still clutching his broken glasses, then to the scattered homework papers that lay forgotten on the ground. The prince had a gift for reading situations quickly, a skill developed through years of public service and countless interactions with people from every walk of life. The bully immediately launched into an explanation that bore little resemblance to reality. "Oh, nothing serious, Your Highness. We were just playing around, you know? Kids being kids. And this old guy got confused and thought something was wrong, but everything's fine now." Thomas watched the prince's face carefully and saw something shift in his expression. There was a sharpness to his eyes now, a quiet intensity that suggested he was not so easily fooled. "I see," Prince William said neutrally. And, you are? The bully puffed up with self-importance. I'm Jake Morrison. My dad owns Morrison Construction Company. We're, really successful. We donated money to your charity last year. The prince nodded politely but didn't seem impressed. His attention turned to the smaller boy, and, when he spoke, his voice was gentle and encouraging. What's your name, son? The child looked terrified, as if speaking to royalty might somehow get him in trouble. David, Your Highness. David Chen. It's nice to meet you, David. Those look like important papers scattered about. Homework, perhaps? David nodded, glancing nervously at Jake. Yes, sir. I mean, Your Highness. It's my math homework. It's due tomorrow. Prince William knelt down and began gathering the papers himself, an action that sent ripples of shock through the small crowd that had begun to form. Other park visitors had noticed the commotion and were pressing closer, phones appearing as word spread that royalty was present. As the prince collected the homework, he spoke quietly to David. Tell me, how did your papers end up scattered like this? David's eyes darted between the prince and Jake, fear clearly warring with the desire to tell the truth to someone who might actually listen. Thomas could see the boy's internal struggle and felt a deep ache in his chest. How many times had he faced similar moments as a child, wanting to speak up but afraid of the consequences? Go ahead, David, Thomas said softly. Tell him what really happened. Jake shot Thomas a warning look that promised retaliation later, but Thomas met his gaze steadily. Whatever consequences came from this moment, he was prepared to face them. Some things were more important than personal safety. David took a shaky breath and looked directly at Prince William. He took my backpack and dumped everything out. He takes my lunch money every day. And, when this man tried to help me, Jake hit him. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's face went red with anger and embarrassment, and, for a moment Thomas thought the boy might try to attack David right there in front of everyone. That's not true. Jake protested. He's lying. I would never do something like that. I'm a good kid. Ask anyone. Prince William stood slowly, still holding David's papers. When he looked at Jake now, there was something unmistakably royal in his bearing, a quiet authority that came from generations of leadership and responsibility. I've found that the truth usually becomes clear if you know how to look for it, the prince said calmly. David, do you have your lunch money with you today? The boy shook his head miserably. No, Your Highness. Jake took it before you got here. All eyes turned to Jake, who suddenly looked much younger and less confident than he had moments before. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't have his stupid money. One of the prince's protection officers stepped forward and whispered something in his ear. The prince nodded and turned his attention to the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand this is exciting, but I'd ask for a bit of space while we sort this out. Children's safety is always our top priority. The crowd reluctantly moved back a few feet, though phones continued to record everything. Thomas realized that this moment was being captured from dozens of angles, that whatever happened next would likely be shared around the world within hours. Prince William turned back to Jake with the patient expression of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. Young man, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make this right. If you have something that belongs to David, now would be the time to return it. Jake's bravado crumbled completely. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, throwing it on the ground near David's feet. There. Happy now? It's just $5. It's not like it's gonna make him rich or anything. The casual cruelty in his voice was worse than his previous aggression. Thomas felt a flash of real anger at the way this boy dismissed not just the money, but David's dignity and worth as a human being. Prince William picked up the $5 and handed it directly to David, who accepted it with shaking hands. This represents more than money, doesn't it? The prince said to Jake. It represents someone's mother working hard to provide for her child. It represents a child going hungry because someone bigger decided to take what wasn't theirs. It represents the choice between being someone who protects others or someone who hurts them. Jake shifted uncomfortably under the prince's steady gaze. Some of the other children had crept closer, drawn by the drama and the unprecedented sight of royalty intervening in their daily lives. "I want to hear more about this man who tried to help," Prince William continued, turning to Thomas. "What's your name?" "Thomas Mitchell, Your Highness. I served in the Royal Army for 25 years. The prince's expression changed immediately, taking on the respect that one service member shows another. 25 years. That's an impressive commitment. Where did you serve?" "Northern Ireland, the Falklands, Iraq twice, Afghanistan twice. I was a sergeant major when I retired." "Sergeant Major Mitchell." The prince's voice carried a new formality now, the acknowledgement of rank and service. "And you saw this situation and decided to intervene?" Thomas nodded. "The boy needed help, Your Highness. I couldn't just walk away." Jake had been growing increasingly agitated as the attention shifted away from him. "This is so unfair. You're only listening to his side. I didn't do anything that bad. All kids get picked on sometimes. It's normal. It builds character." The words hung in the air like an accusation against every adult who had ever dismissed bullying as a normal part of growing up. Thomas saw Prince William's jaw tighten slightly, and realized that this was touching something personal for the royal family member. "You know," Prince William said quietly, "I was bullied at school myself. Boys who thought that because they knew who I was, they could make my life difficult. I know what it feels like to be afraid to go to school, to wonder if today would be the day someone decided to push things too far." This revelation sent another ripple through the crowd. Here was one of the most famous and privileged people in the world, admitting that he had experienced the same fear and helplessness that thousands of children faced every day. "But I was lucky," the prince continued. "I had protection, resources, people who would listen when I spoke up. David doesn't have those advantages. He just has his courage and the hope that someday, someone will care enough to help." Jake's friends had arrived now, drawn by the commotion and the spreading word that Prince William was in the park. They stood at the edge of the crowd, uncertain whether to approach their friend or distance themselves from the situation. "What I don't understand," Prince William said, addressing Jake directly, "is why you would choose to use your size and strength to hurt someone smaller instead of protecting them. You're obviously intelligent, you come from a family with resources, you have advantages that many children don't have. Why waste those gifts on cruelty?" For the first time since the confrontation began, Jake seemed to really think about what he was being asked. His usual bluster faded, replaced by something that might have been genuine confusion. "I don't know," he said finally. "Everyone expects me to be tough. My dad always says I need to be strong, that the world will eat me alive if I'm weak. He says nice guys finish last." Thomas felt a familiar sadness at those words. He had heard them before, from young soldiers who had been taught that strength and cruelty were the same thing, that showing compassion was a sign of weakness. "Your father is wrong," Prince William said simply. "Strength without kindness is just bullying. Real strength is what Sergeant Major Mitchell showed today when he stepped in to help David, knowing he might get hurt for doing the right thing." Jake looked at Thomas with new eyes, perhaps seeing him clearly for the first time. Here was a man who had faced real enemies in real battles, who had earned his right to claim toughness through genuine sacrifice and service. And that man had chosen to use his strength to protect, not to harm. "I want to tell you something that my grandmother taught me," Prince William continued, his voice carrying the weight of royal wisdom passed down through generations. "She said that true nobility isn't about titles or wealth or power. It's about how you treat people who can't help you, who can't fight back, who have nothing to offer you except their humanity. That's the measure of who you really are." The playground had become an outdoor classroom, with dozens of people listening to an impromptu lesson in character and responsibility from one of the world's most recognizable figures. Thomas realized that this moment would stay with these children for the rest of their lives, shaping how they understood right and wrong, strength and weakness, privilege and responsibility. David had been quietly gathering his remaining homework papers, but now he looked up at Prince William with something approaching awe. "Your Highness?" Thank you for helping me. And thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for standing up for me. Nobody ever did that before. The simple gratitude in the child's voice was worth every ache in Thomas's jaw, every moment of uncertainty he had felt about interfering. This was why he had served, why he had put his life on the line in foreign countries, to protect the innocent, to stand between the strong and the weak, to make sure that decent people could live without fear. Prince William handed David the last of his papers. You're very brave, David. It takes courage to tell the truth, especially when you're afraid. Don't let anyone convince you that asking for help is weakness. The strongest people I know are the ones who aren't afraid to admit when they need support. Jake had been growing more uncomfortable with each passing moment, shifting from foot to foot as the attention remained focused on David and Thomas. His friends were looking at him with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disgust, and Thomas could see the boy's social world crumbling around him. This is stupid, Jake muttered. I don't have to listen to this. You can't make me do anything. My dad's gonna hear about this, and he's not gonna be happy that some old guy and some foreign prince think they can tell me what to do. The casual disrespect in his voice created an immediate tension. Prince William's protection officers stepped slightly closer, their professional masks slipping just enough to show their displeasure. But Prince William himself remained calm, though there was steel in his voice when he spoke. You're absolutely right, Jake. I can't make you do anything. But I can make sure that what happened here today is remembered. And I can make sure that people know who you chose to be when you had the chance to do better. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. In an age of social media and instant communication, the story of a young bully confronting royalty and a veteran would spread faster than wildfire. Jake's behavior wouldn't just fade into memory, it would become part of his permanent digital legacy. For the first time, real fear appeared in Jake's eyes. Not the simple fear of getting in trouble with his parents, but the deeper understanding that his actions had consequences beyond his immediate world. Thomas watched the boy's face and felt an unexpected surge of compassion. Jake was young, probably influenced by a father who had taught him the wrong lessons about strength and success. There was still time for him to learn better, to become the kind of person the world needed more of. Your Highness, Thomas said quietly, if I may? Prince William nodded, recognizing the voice of experience. Thomas turned to Jake, speaking with the firm but kind tone he had used with young soldiers under his command. Son, you're at a crossroads right now. You can double down on this path you're on, become the kind of person who leaves a trail of hurt feelings and broken spirits behind him. Or you can choose to be better. You can choose to be someone who uses his strength to build people up instead of tearing them down. Jake's defiance was cracking, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Perhaps he had been waiting for someone to show him a different way, someone to give him permission to be kind instead of cruel. What if I can't? Jake asked, his voice smaller than it had been all afternoon. What if everyone expects me to be mean? What if being nice just makes everyone think I'm weak? Prince William stepped forward again, his expression gentle but determined. Then, you show them what real strength looks like. You show them that protecting others is braver than hurting them. You show them that true leadership means lifting people up, not putting them down. The crowd around them had grown larger, but it remained respectfully quiet, as if everyone understood they were witnessing something important. Parents held their children closer, teenagers put away their phones to really listen, elderly park visitors nodded with approval at the lessons being shared. Thomas realized that this moment had grown beyond a simple confrontation between a bully and his victim. It had become a teaching opportunity, a chance to plant seeds of change that might grow into something beautiful. But he also knew that the most important test was still to come. Talk was easy, action was harder. The real question was whether Jake Morrison would choose to be different when the cameras stopped rolling and the prince drove away. That answer would determine not just David Chen's future safety, but the kind of man Jake would become. Prince William glanced at his watch and then at his protection officers, who gave him subtle nods indicating they needed to maintain their schedule. But, instead of immediately departing, the prince did something that surprised everyone present. Sergeant Major Mitchell, would you walk with me for a moment? Thomas felt honored by the request, though his military bearing kept him composed. As they stepped away from the immediate crowd, Prince William's demeanor became more personal, less formal. "Tell me about your service," the prince said as they walked slowly along the park path. Thomas found himself opening up to the prince in a way he hadn't expected. Perhaps it was the genuine interest in William's voice, or maybe it was the shared understanding between two men who had devoted their lives to serving others. "I enlisted when I was 17, Your Highness. Came from a rough area in Manchester, wasn't much future there for a kid like me. The army gave me purpose, taught me what it meant to be part of something bigger than myself." Prince William nodded thoughtfully. "And your deployments? Those must have been challenging." "They were, sir. Lost some good mates along the way. But we knew what we were fighting for. We were protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, standing up for what's right even when it was dangerous. Like you did today with David." Thomas felt a flush of pride at the comparison. "That boy reminded me of my younger brother, Your Highness. Same gentle nature, same kind heart. My brother was bullied terribly at school, and I was too young and scared to help him. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again if I could prevent it." They had reached a quiet section of the path, shaded by old oak trees that had stood sentinel over the park for generations. Prince William stopped walking and turned to face Thomas directly. "I want to ask you something, Sergeant Major. That young man, Jake, what's your assessment of him?" Thomas considered the question carefully. His years of military service had taught him to read people quickly, to distinguish between those who were truly dangerous and those who were simply lost. "He's angry, Your Highness, but not evil. I guess his father pushes him hard, maybe teaches him the wrong lessons about strength. The boy's looking for approval, trying to be what he thinks a man should be. He just needs someone to show him a better way." Prince William smiled slightly. "That's very perceptive. And very compassionate, considering he just hit you in the face." "I've taken worse hits from better men," Thomas replied with a slight grin. "Besides, sometimes a person needs to make a mistake before they can learn to do better." As they spoke, the crowd back at the playground had grown considerably. Word was spreading through social media, and people were arriving from all over the city to catch a glimpse of the prince. But, more importantly, the children who had witnessed the confrontation were talking among themselves, processing what they had seen. David Chen had become something of a celebrity among the younger kids. They gathered around him, asking questions about what it felt like to talk to a real prince, marveling at his bravery in telling the truth. For perhaps the first time in his life, David was the center of positive attention. "You were so brave," a little girl named Sarah told him. "I would have been too scared to say anything." David adjusted his broken glasses and shrugged modestly. "I was scared too. But Mr. Mitchell helped me feel like someone cared. And Prince William was so nice. He made me feel like what happened to me mattered." Meanwhile, Jake stood apart from the other children, watching the scene with a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. His friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with the attention and unwilling to be associated with someone who had embarrassed himself so publicly. Jake's phone buzzed with notifications. Videos of the confrontation were already appearing online, tagged with phrases like "bully meets royalty" and "Prince defends bullied kid." The teenager's face grew pale as he realized the scope of what was happening. One video, shot by a park visitor with a good camera, clearly showed Jake taking David's money and shoving the smaller boy to the ground. Another captured the moment when he punched Thomas, followed by the veteran's remarkable restraint and dignity. The contrast between Jake's aggression and the older man's calm strength was striking and unflattering. An elderly woman approached Jake cautiously. She had been watching from a park bench, her weathered hands folded over her walking cane. "Young man," she said gently, "are you all right? You look upset." Jake looked at her suspiciously, expecting judgment or lecture. Instead, he saw genuine concern in her kind eyes. "I messed up," he said quietly. "Really, really messed up. My dad's gonna kill me when he sees the videos." The woman, whose name was Eleanor Banks, had been a teacher for 40 years before retiring. She had seen thousands of children struggle with anger, fear, and poor guidance. Her instinct was always to look for the hurt beneath the harmful behavior. "What's your father like?" she asked gently. Jake's walls came down just a little. "He's hard. He owns a big construction company, and he's always telling me I need to be tough. That weakness gets you nowhere in business. He says I need to learn to take what I want instead of waiting for it to be given to me." Eleanor nodded sadly. She had encountered many parents who confused aggression with strength, who taught their children that success required stepping on others. "And how does that make you feel?" she asked. "Tired," Jake admitted, the word coming out like a confession. "I'm tired of always having to prove I'm tough. I'm tired of other kids being afraid of me. I don't even like taking their money or pushing them around. It just feels like what I'm supposed to do." Back on the path, Prince William was coming to a decision that would change several lives. He had been moved by Thomas's story and impressed by the veteran's character. More than that, he had seen an opportunity to turn a troubling incident into something positive. "Sergeant Major Mitchell," he said formally, "I have a proposition for you." Thomas straightened to attention instinctively. "I'm involved with several charitable organizations that work with young people, particularly those who are struggling with bullying, either as victims or perpetrators. We could use someone with your experience and wisdom to help guide our programs." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Since Margaret